It took me 43 years to understand the man I slept beside every night of my adult life. Not 43 years of suspicion, not 43 years of quiet worry. 43 years of ordinary mornings and evening prayers, and the particular smell of his work coat hanging by the door. 43 years of believing I knew him completely, because the ordning had never given me reason to doubt it, and because I had loved him too fully to go looking. 3 weeks after we buried Eli, I opened the cedar chest at the foot of our bed, the one he had asked me, gently and only once, never to open while he lived. I had honoured that for 43 years. I lifted the wedding quilt I had stitched the winter before our marriage, and underneath it, my fingers found something flat, something in a cardboard sleeve. I pulled it out. A photograph. A young man in English clothes I did not recognise. A woman beside him. A small boy on his knee. I recognised the hands. I had held those hands for 43 years. I set the photograph on the kitchen table. I did not weep. Not yet. I put the kettle on first. If you have ever found yourself understanding something far too late, if you have ever held an answer in your hands and felt the shape of all the questions you never thought to ask, stay with me tonight. I read every comment you leave, every single one. And if this is your first time here, I would be grateful if you stayed. There is more I need to say. My name is Sarah. I am 78 years old. I have lived in the same community my whole life, except for the 3 years after Eli's death, when I moved into the Doty house beside my youngest son's farm. I have kneaded bread in the same kitchen for longer than most people alive have been breathing. I have swept the same porch steps 10,000 times. I thought I knew every board of this life. I am telling you this because what I found in that cedar chest did not feel like a discovery at first. It felt like the floor going out from under a house I had lived in for decades without ever checking the foundation. I have spent 3 weeks since finding that photograph walking back through everything. Not to punish Eli. He is beyond my reach now, and beyond my anger, if I even had any. I have been walking back to find the things I missed, the clues that were sitting in plain sight, patient as stones along a road. There were 5 of them. I did not see a single one for what it was. I will tell you each one now, in the order they came to me. Not the order they happened, but the order I finally saw them clearly. I want you to see them the way I saw them first, without the truth, the way I lived with them, now. If you have ever listened from the quiet of a late evening, wanting only to hear something honest, tell me where you are tonight. I read every word, and if it would mean something to you to stay close, there is a place to do that just below this. I would be glad of the company. The first thing I should have noticed was that Eli never spoke of where he came from. Not the way other men did. Every husband I had ever known, my father, my uncles, the men in our church district, They carried their childhood farms inside them like a second skeleton. My father could name every field his father had ploughed and describe the colour of the barn door from when he was 4 years old. Eli could not do this. When I asked him, early in our first year of marriage, he said only, "My people are gone." I was oiling the leather of a bridle beside him when he said it. He did not look up from his work. I smelled the harness oil and heard the quiet of the barn, and I thought, grief. I planted that answer in the part of my heart where I kept other people's sorrows, and I did not pull it back out. The Ordnung did not ask a man to carry his pain in public. I thought his silence was faithfulness to what had been lost. I did not think to ask what he meant by gone. There was a blessing, Eli said, before every meal of our married life. A Pennsylvania Dutch phrase my father had taught me as a small child. One I had heard from the lips of every elder in the community since before I could read. Eli said it wrong. The vowel in the middle of it sat in the wrong place. Not terribly wrong, not so wrong a stranger would notice, but wrong in a way I noticed because I had grown up hearing it said correctly. In the first year of our marriage, I touched his arm gently at the table one evening and said the phrase back to him the right way, the way my father had said it. He looked at me, not with embarrassment, not with the small, good-natured shame of a man caught in a harmless error. He looked at me with what I can only call careful stillness. Then he smiled. He thanked me. He said it the wrong way again at supper the next evening, and at every meal for 43 years after that. I heard it so many times it stopped sounding wrong. Our children grew up hearing it. Our grandchildren heard it from his lips. I thought it was stubbornness. I should have thought longer about what it was. Before I tell you the third thing, I want to sit here a moment. This is the part of the trail where the path starts to feel different underfoot. Not dangerous yet, but different. If you have been with me this far, I am grateful. There is a guide in the description below for those who want to understand more about the community Eli and I lived in, the customs that shaped what I could see and what I was not permitted to look for. And if something in what I have said so far has stirred something in you, something from your own life, your own silences, I would be glad to hear it. One summer, when our oldest children were still young, Eli and I travelled to a regional market 3 counties from home. It was a warm day. The market was loud with the smell of cut wood and fresh corn, and the particular heat that comes off canvas awnings in July. I was looking at fabric when I heard a man say a name. I did not catch the name clearly. It was said from across the aisle, and the market was noisy. But I looked up because of the way Eli went still. The man across the aisle was perhaps Eli's age. He was dressed plain, but not from our district. He had gone pale. He stared at Eli for one long breath. Not the stare of a man who has made a mistake and is correcting himself, but the stare of a man who has seen something he was not prepared to see. Eli turned to me quietly and said, "He has mistaken me for someone else." The man did not argue. He walked away quickly, without buying anything, without looking back. I watched Eli's hands return to the corn husks on the table beside us. They were steady, unhurried. I believed him. I had no reason not to. But the face of that man stayed inside me for a long time afterward. The particular look of someone who has not made a mistake at all, but who has been shown, in one glance, that he should walk away and say nothing. I did not think about that face again for 31 years. When our firstborn son was placed in Eli's arms, I watched my husband the way every new wife watches her husband hold their child for the first time. I expected to see what I had seen on the faces of other new fathers in the community. The trembling reverence of a man touching something this fragile and this new. The uncertain, almost frightened tenderness of a first time. Eli did not hold our son that way. He held him with a specific steadiness, a practiced quietness. The way a man holds a child when his body has already learned the weight of one. He did not tremble. He did not look uncertain. He looked at our son's face for a long time, very still, and his eyes held something I did not have a name for then. I told myself it was his calm nature. I told myself God had given him a steady heart where other men had unsteady hands. I folded that explanation into the same place I had folded all the others. It was not until I opened that cedar chest that I understood what kind of steadiness that was, what kind of looking. I am going to ask you to stay with me now. The picture is beginning to take shape. I can see the edges of it. But in those 3 weeks after finding the photograph, I could not yet see the centre. I kept returning to the kitchen table. I kept looking at those 4 memories laid out in my mind like 4 stones on a flat surface. And I could not yet see what they were pointing to. It was the 5th thing, the chest itself. That was what finally made the shape visible. And that is where I will take you next. I sat at that kitchen table for a long time. The photograph was face up in front of me. The kettle had gone cold. I laid the 4 things out in my mind, the way you lay quilt pieces on a flat floor before you begin to stitch. No childhood stories. The blessing said wrong for 43 years. The man at the market who went pale. The way Eli held our firstborn son. Alone, each of these was nothing. A grieving man's silence, a stubborn mispronunciation, a stranger's mistake, a calm father's hands. Together, they were a door I had never tried to open. I had not tried because I had been taught, from the time I was old enough to be taught anything, that a good woman smooths the cloth. She does not pull at the threads. The cedar chest had sat at the foot of our bed since the first week of our marriage. Eli carried it in himself before the furniture was fully arranged, and set it down with the particular care a man gives to something fragile. He told me it held letters from before his baptism. Private correspondence between himself and God, he called it. He asked me, gently and only once, not to open it while he lived. I did not hesitate. In our community, a man's inner covenant with God was his own. To reach into that chest would have been hochmut, pride dressed as curiosity. I covered it with the wedding quilt I had stitched that winter, and I did not touch it again for 43 years. I thought I was honouring his privacy. I thought I was being a faithful wife. I understand now that he had placed the one thing he could not bring himself to destroy, the only proof that those people had existed, inside the one space he knew my reverence would guard without question. He had hidden it behind my love. He had understood me completely, and he had trusted that understanding to do what a locked door could not. I am going to sit here a moment before I go further. If you are still with me, you already know what I am moving toward, and if something in this story has touched something in your own, a secret kept too long, a question you were never permitted to ask, a truth that arrived after it was too late to do anything with it, leave me a word in the comments. Just tell me you were here. Tell me what you felt. And for those who want to understand more about the world Eli and I lived in, the customs that shaped what I could and could not see, there is a guide waiting for you in the description below. I picked up the photograph again. This time I looked at it fully. I had not let myself look fully the first time. The woman beside the young man was perhaps 19 years old, dark-haired. She was not smiling, the way people did not smile in photographs then, but her face was turned slightly toward him, and there was something in the angle of her shoulder that spoke of familiarity, of belonging. The child on his knee was a boy, perhaps 2 years old. He had Eli's broad forehead. He had Eli's hands. Already, even at 2, the same wide, square shape I had held across 4 decades of my own life. There was a date marked on the back of the photograph in faded pencil. I calculated without meaning to. Eli would have been 23. He did not come to our community until he was 26. I do not know what happened in those 3 years. I do not know if the other life ended by choice, or by grief, or by some combination of the two that I will never have language for. I know only that he came to us, was baptized, took his place among the brethren, and built everything that followed from silence forward. He never lied about who he was inside. He only sealed the door on who he had been before. I sat with that distinction for a long time. It mattered to me then. It still matters to me now. And then the 4 stones on the floor snapped into their true shape. All at once, the way understanding actually arrives. Not like a slow dawn, but like a lamp turned up suddenly in a dark room. The blessing he said wrong at every meal for 43 years was not stubbornness. It was the permanent accent of a man who had learned that language at 23, not at birth, who had repeated the error so many thousands of times that it had become the only version his mouth knew, and who had, perhaps, somewhere along the way, stopped wanting to correct it, because correcting it would have meant admitting there had been a time before. The man at the market had not mistaken him for someone else. He had recognized him exactly, had seen in one breath the man Eli had been before the baptism, and the new name and the 43 years of plain life, and had understood from Eli's face that recognition was not welcome. And the way Eli held our firstborn son, that practiced, steady, heartbroken quietness, That was the way a man holds a child when he is trying to give back to God something God took from him the first time. He had held a son before. He had lost that holding. And when our son was placed in his arms, he already knew the weight. I set the photograph down on the wedding quilt, face up. I left it there. He was a good husband. I want to say that plainly, because it is true, and because I am not willing to let the photograph take that from him now. He sat at our table. He said the blessing wrong, and we bowed our heads and we ate. He worked hard ground and raised children who are good people. He grew old beside me in the particular, quiet way of two people who have worn the same life so long they stop noticing where one ends and the other begins. I do not believe he stopped loving the woman in that photograph. I do not believe he stopped thinking of the boy on his knee. I think he carried them the way a man carries a wound that has closed over cleanly. Always present, visible to no one, aching only in cold weather. The community knew him as Eli. I knew him as Eli. But somewhere underneath Eli, there was a younger man with a different name, who had loved people I never met and lost them in ways I will never fully understand. I wonder sometimes, in the evenings now, whether he ever whispered that other name in the dark after I had fallen asleep. I do not say this with bitterness. I say it with the particular sorrow of a woman who loved a man she almost knew. I'm 78 now. I have folded the photograph back into its cardboard sleeve. I have not shown it to our children. I do not know yet if I will. That is a question I am still carrying, and I have learned at this age that not every question needs to be answered before it is held. I sit on the porch steps some evenings, the same steps where Eli used to oil his boots on Sunday nights, the same boards he sanded smooth the summer our youngest learned to walk. And I think about what it means to love someone who kept one room of themselves locked. I think about the 43 years I spent in a house with a door I was never supposed to open. And I think about how faithfully I honored that, how completely I yielded. If you grew up in a world where you were taught that asking was pride and silence was faithfulness, where a good woman smooths the cloth and does not pull at the threads, then you know how a woman can spend 43 years not seeing what she was never given permission to look for. I see you. I have always seen you. Understanding does not always arrive when we need it. Sometimes it arrives when we are finally old enough to hold it without breaking. I had already forgiven Eli before I knew what I was forgiving. Forgiven him in the daily, wordless way of a long marriage, in every meal and every cold morning and every evening prayer. When I found the photograph, I did not have to decide whether to forgive him. I only had to discover that I already had. That, I think, is the only grace available to those of us who love imperfectly and are loved the same way back. If this story stayed with you tonight, leave me a word below. One word for what you felt sitting here with me. I read every single one, and I am grateful for every one. There is more I have not yet said. Next time, I will tell you about the letter I found beneath the photograph. I have not been able to speak of it until now.